Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're heading, virtually speaking, to the Pacific, to Tuvalu.
Right, that string of 9 coral atolls. You see the pictures, amazing white beaches, the incredible turquoise water.
Exactly, picture postcard stuff. But,
Right.
well, this isn't a holiday brochure. Tuvalu's become this really powerful symbol of the global climate crisis.
A frontline state, you could say, experiencing the impact of rising sea levels very directly.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to really get under the surface. We want to understand what Tuvalu is actually facing.
Going beyond just the headlines about islands disappearing.
Precisely. Looking at the nuances, the complexities, and what possible solutions, if any, are on the table.
And we're drawing on some solid reporting for this, particularly from the BBC.
Yeah, and that includes key findings from Virginie Duvat, who's an IPCC contributor. Okay, let's dive in.
Well, the first thing that jumps out from the sources is how tangible climate change already is there. It's not theoretical.
Not some distant future problem.
Not at all. Rising sea levels are causing more flooding right now, damaging crops, homes, getting into freshwater sources.
I read about Funafuti, the capital, experiencing high tide flooding almost routinely now.
Yeah, it's becoming like the new normal. And it's happening fast, generational knowledge about tides. It's becoming outdated really quickly.
Wow. Imagine trying to plan your life around that.
Exactly. It just completely disrupts everything. And we're hearing about communities on outer islands already having to move.
Forced relocation because of repeated storms hitting them harder.
That's what the reporting suggests. It's a present-day reality, not just a future scenario for some.
Which brings us to that research you mentioned from Virginie Duvat. Her findings, highlighted by the BBC, are quite, well, surprising, aren't they?
They really are, because she argues that Tuvalu hasn't necessarily lost overall landmass.
Wait, so the islands aren't actually sinking into the sea in the way we might picture it?
Not exactly, or at least it's more complicated. Her work looks at how atolls naturally change shape, erosion here, accretion there. It's dynamic.
Okay, so if the land isn't just vanishing, what's the real emergency?
The crucial word is inhabitability. That's the core threat.
Inhabitability, meaning?
Meaning the conditions needed for life are being destroyed. Even if the land is technically still there, can people actually live on it safely?
Ah, okay. So things
Like reliable freshwater, sanitation, safe housing, functioning roads. The rising seas and stronger storms damage all that infrastructure.
making the islands much more vulnerable when the next storm hits.
Precisely. So the land might exist, but it's becoming increasingly dangerous and unsustainable to live there. That's the shift in focus.
That makes sense. It's a much broader crisis than just land area. And part of that growing vulnerability is about losing their natural defenses, right?
Absolutely. The coral reefs, they're fundamental for low-lying atolls like Tuvalu.
They act as a sort of natural barrier.
Exactly, like underwater breakwaters. They dissipate huge amounts of wave energy, protecting the coastlines from storm surges.
But the problem is the reefs themselves are in trouble.
Big trouble. The BBC reporting details the rapid coral bleaching happening.
Which is caused by rising ocean temperatures, stressing the coral.
That's right. The corals expel the algae they need to survive, turn white, and eventually can die.
And a dead reef doesn't protect the island anymore.
It loses its structure, its effectiveness, and it's a domino effect. Marine biodiversity collapses. That's their food source, their livelihood.
And it affects life on land, too.
Of course. Everything's interconnected. The health of the ocean impacts the land, the plants, the animals. It's the whole ecosystem.
So losing the reefs is, wow, it's undermining their entire way of life.
Yeah.
Looking ahead then, what do the projections say? The IPCC stuff sounds pretty grim.
Yeah, the sources we looked at, they do paint a challenging picture.
Huh.
Some of the more pessimistic scenarios suggest Tuvalu could become largely uninhabitable,
By when?
potentially as early as 2050,
Yeah.
with the overall climate risks really ramping up by 2090.
And what does uninhabitable look like in that context?
It means more frequent, more intense extreme weather, stronger cyclones, more destructive floods pushing further inland.
And the knock-on effects of that must be huge.
Absolutely devastating. Contamination of the already scarce freshwater, damage to fishing grounds, ruined farmland from saltwater.
Undermining their ability to feed themselves.
Fundamentally. And it just puts more and more stress on that fragile ecosystem. It becomes a vicious cycle.
So, facing this, what are the options? The leaders, the people of Tuvalu, they're facing impossible choices, it seems.
It really boils down to two main paths as the sources lay out. Adaptation or relocation.
Relocation meaning moving entire communities.
Yeah, potentially to neighbors like Fiji or Australia. It offers immediate safety from the physical threats, obviously.
But the cost, leaving your homeland, your culture, your ancestors.
It's immense, unimaginably painful, losing that connection to place, dispersing a whole nation. It's a choice no one should have to make.
And the alternative is adaptation, trying to stay and cope.
Right. Trying to live with the changes. That means things like raising buildings, building seawalls, maybe even land reclamation projects.
Engineering solutions.
Partly. But crucially, Duval's work really stresses preserving and restoring those marine ecosystems, the natural defenses.
Back to the coral reefs.
Exactly. Healthy reefs can reduce wave height by, what was it, up to 70%?
70%. That's huge.
It's massive. So managing those ecosystems sustainably isn't just environmentalism. It's a core adaptation strategy.
It shows how interconnected it all is. You can build a wall, but you also need the healthy reef in front of it.
You do. But even with all these efforts, and the Tuvaluan people are incredibly resilient, the sources do hint.
That adaptation might have its limits.
Yeah. There's a sobering sense that against the sheer scale and speed of climate change, these measures might not be enough in the long run.
The scale of the problem is just too big for a small nation to tackle alone.
That's the stark reality. They lack the resources, the capacity to fully counteract a global phenomenon.
Which really brings us to the heart of it. Tuvalu, one of the world's smallest nations, contributing almost nothing to climate change,
is bearing the absolute brunt of the crisis. It highlights the profound injustice.
The most vulnerable are paying the highest price.
And it serves as this incredibly urgent wake-up call, doesn't it, for immediate, meaningful global action.
What happens in Tuvalu depends directly on decisions made far away in larger industrialized nations.
Absolutely. Their future habitability hangs in the balance.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the key takeaways from this deep dive. The situation in Tuvalu, it's much more than just sinking islands.
Right. The core issue is this growing inhabitability, damaged infrastructure, vulnerability to storms, loss of fresh water,
Compounded by the loss of those vital natural defenses like the coral reefs.
which leaves them facing this incredibly uncertain future. Difficult choices between adaptation, which might not be enough, and relocation, which means losing their home.
It leaves us with a pretty challenging thought, doesn't it? Thinking about Tuvalu, what does this mean for other vulnerable coastal regions worldwide?
Yeah, what are the wider implications? And crucially, what responsibility do larger nations have? Not just for cutting emissions, but for dealing with climate-induced displacement.
Supporting adaptation, perhaps even funding relocation where it becomes unavoidable. Big questions.
Huge questions.
And for our listeners preparing for the UPSC exams, this case study of Tuvalu is, well, incredibly relevant.
Definitely. It touches on so many key themes: environmental challenges, international relations, climate justice, sustainable development.
The potential for climate refugees,
Yeah.
state responsibility, it's all there. It really puts a human face on these massive global issues.
It shows the real-world impact, the human cost of climate change, which is vital to understand.
Absolutely. So if you found this deep dive useful for your preparation, please do give us a like, subscribe for more analyses like this one.
And leave a comment. Let us know if you have more questions or thoughts. We do read them.
We do. And just a reminder, much of the information we discussed was based on reporting from the BBC, including insights from Virginie Duvat's work. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.